Welcome to this introduction to Unit 3. Unit 3 is really about color theory. We're using acrylic paint as a means of exploring some traditional color theory and also applying that color theory to hopefully a fun, edible assignment. That is, you can eat the subject matter, not the assignment. Anyhow, when you start this unit, you're going to see that there's the introduction. Some of you haven't really been exploring your introduction as much as I would like, so please read through it carefully. It's going to give you hints on what you're going to be marked on. And you'll see there's a couple of terms that are used in here. One is understand the use of warm and cool color in executing a design, and also use a variety of color strategies, including complementary color. So when you go to do both your abstract color wheel and your pastry painting, please keep those two things in mind, because that's partly what I'll be, it'll be an important part of what I'm marking you on. There's a read and response again for this particular introduction, and there's a short article on color theory. I wanted you to think a bit about where color theory comes from. It's very complex in that there's no real total science that is behind the kind of color theory used by artists. It's a combination of learned application, study of how human beings look at color, and traditional methods. So it's kind of a complex thing. You can't just say color theory is one thing. And that's what this article is trying to show you. That being said, we're kind of going back to basics because we are actually looking at color wheels. And we're looking at a complex color wheel. This isn't the color wheel you did in elementary school with your primary and secondary colors. You're actually trying to really look at how blending different hues of colors creates the range of colors that we can use as painters. So you'll notice that there is the traditional wheel, and there's an abstract version of the traditional wheel in the first assignment. So let's quickly look at what you need for this assignment. The video guide to this assignment will talk to you a bit more in detail about materials. I'm recommending that you use a cheaper paper and then gesso it so that you have a better surface to paint on. If for some reason you can't access gesso, you can always use a slightly heavier paper if possible. You're going to be using a very concise, a very detailed color wheel that's properly laid out. I want you to actually draw your circle. I want you to actually divide your color wheel into equal segments. So if you don't have the tools to do this, the compass and ruler, try to, the best of your ability, get your wheel divided in a very precise way. One kind of trick would be to basically trace a circular object and then fold the wheel on a thinner piece of paper to get all your different lines, and then use that as a model for how you do your wheel. Just a thought. The wheel, it combines 6 rows where you're combining different hues. There's a written version of how that is supposed to be done. If you read through it, tells you exactly what you should be mixing. And then for the abstract wheel, you're going to do your 12 segments and then you're going to cut them up. I had an issue with a few people last term not realizing that you literally are cutting your existing wheel, placing those triangles down and trying to respond to them with color theory. So what's color theory? You're going to try to use complementary colors and analogous colors. And what are those? Complementary colors are the color that is across the wheel from the colors. So if you look at our simplified wheel, you can see that red is across from green. Those are complementary colors. Blue is across from orange. Those are complementary colors. Yellow is across from purple. That's a complementary color. Analogous colors are colors that are close to the color in the color wheel. So I really want you to try to play with purposeful use of color responding to those pure triangles. So you can use different hues, different mixes of the colors, complementary colors, and you can use tinted colors. Don't forget those black and white tinted colors that you experimented with on your wheel. Apply them to your abstract wheel. I've got some samples here of students' work from the past. You can see that, again, the wheel is done on a half sheet of paper. Working larger is easier. It's much easier to paint in the segments of the wheel. So if you can maximize the size of your circle on your wheel, you'll find this to go a lot easier. Some people have challenges with the red purple part of the wheel, that blue red part of the wheel. Remember, you're not going to be using equal amounts of color to get the colors you need. You're going to have to sort of play with how much blue to red you mix to get that real spread of colors around the wheel. So those are some samples of the traditional wheel. Here's a good example from a student of the abstract wheel. What's great about this? They've used all of their 12 pure color segments, and then they've used some colored tints. They've played with the idea of complementary colors. You can see that there's a nice green-red example up here. They've also played with the idea of cool and warm colors. So you've got a nice warm yellow popping on top of a cool purple in behind, which is also a complementary relationship. So this is a really good example of thinking about the use of color and color theory in an abstract wheel. So keep that in mind. Second assignment for this particular unit, I'm just going to flip the page here, is your pastry assignment. And it's inspired by an artist called Wayne Thiebaud. And why? Why? Because he was an amazing colorist, but he used these really everyday things that you always see around you. Well, maybe not quite as fancy. I don't usually have fancy cakes like this at my house, but it's that idea of an everyday object being a source for exploration of color. And what's fun about baking and pastries, it's got really poppy colors. So it's kind of a fun starting point for creating a painting that is exploring the use of color. So there's a nice little look at Wayne Thiebaud's work in this introduction to this assignment. And then there's quite a detailed video instruction for this assignment. And one of the things I really want to point out to you is that you want to try to use large scale. So you want your pastry to your page to be big enough that you can really explore the paint within each object. You don't want to just have a solid colored object, tiny object on a big page. You really want to explore color mixing within your pastry form. You can keep your actual rendering of that object pretty simple. I mean, look at a cupcake. It's basically a trapezoid with, a round shape on top. But you really want to try to explore the color within that shape. So when I'm looking at light and dark in the pastry, I'm not looking at light blue, dark blue, or light orange, dark orange. I'm trying to think about color theory. So I'm looking at warm light orange as a highlight on a dark blue shadow on something like a rippled cupcake wrapper. So really pay attention to that in the demonstration, how I'm looking at the actual color of the object, but then I'm translating that into the warm, cool version and the complementary color version of that color. So if I've got pink icing, maybe it's got a green huge shadow on the edges of the icing. So really think about your color. Again, I've got some examples of this. This is a good example for scale. So you've got these quite large cupcakes and shadows. The color in this one did get a little bit muddy, but there's a really quite a good use of a mixture of colors to sort of create this chocolate icing. So you're not just trying to make black brown for chocolate. There's reds and purples and blues. That's a good use of color. Something this person could have thought of was something like really light yellow highlights on your blue icing. That would have really popped, because that's what complementary colors do. They visually buzz and attract the eye. This is very simple shadow. You could have drapery with your cupcakes. You could have a horizon line. Things, they've got a really top high horizon line here, but you could add things to make your still life more interesting. This is a great example of color theory, but not a great example of scale. You've got just this tiny little plate of pastries floating in a big page. If this had been cropped in so that you were looking at that on a page, look at how much more interesting that is as a composition. You can even let your plate and edge of your pastries go off the page to make for an interesting composition. But what's great about this particular example is the use of great color mixing. So you've got nice yellow highlights with red for warm colors, and then you've got these purple shadows on that yellow pastry, and then these nice blue cool shadows underneath. So there's a variety of colors being used. They're being layered in application. That's the other thing. Acrylic paint is great to layer, keep layering until you get interesting color mixes. And you've got strong use of complementary and warm, cool colors. That's what we're looking for in this assignment. I hope you have fun with this assignment. I hope you have access to baking. I have had people use pies. I've had people use a loaf of bread. Keep in mind, it's not necessarily the color of the objects, it's how you interpret those colors in color theory. So bread could be very interesting if it was, you know, a nice kind of navy blue crust with orangey kind of insides. So have fun, play with color, use things that you have around the house. If you can't get out to buy yourself some pastries in this difficult time we're having. And if you have any questions about the two major assignments in this unit, please send me a note. And that's your introduction to Unit 3.